said. I'm Matt Tesaro, and also as Dawn said, I just gave this on Friday, actually, of last week at LastCon, so it is hot off the presses. So who am I? I like to call myself a reformed programmer and an AppSec engineer. I'm also the CTO and co-founder of Defect Dojo Inc. I've had 15 plus years. I think it was 2008 was the first time I really got involved with effort or significantly in the OWASP community. I'm a core maintainer of Defect Dojo. I'm the host of the OWASP podcast. I'm currently on the board of directors for OWASP. I ran the AppSec pipeline and WT projects as well. I'm a Linux person. You're getting this from a Linux box. That's just the way I am. I like free and Libre and open source software, and I like Go. I'm a Go fanboy. That's what I write these days. And that is a picture of me doing a double front kick board break for my second degree black belt. And then if I'm lucky, maybe that later in 25, I'll test for my third degree black belt. We'll see. Okay, so what is this going to be today? So I'm going to quickly define what ASPM is. We'll do an overview of ASPM in the marketplace, sort of if you look around in industry, what it looks like. I'm going to talk about the real value of ASPM. I have the deja vu all over again section. I'll leave that mysterious for now. AppSec first principles. And then I'm going to talk about making ASPM real and actionable. So let's get this rolling. So let's define ASPM. So straight out of Gartner, this is a document that I could find that actually was public. Application security posture management analyzes security signals across software development, deployment, and operation to improve visibility, better manage vulnerabilities, and enforce controls. Security leaders can use ASPM to improve application security efficiency and better manage risk. Okay, that's fair. Seems like a reasonable definition. I asked Google's AI, because, hey, AI these days. I was like, what is ASPM? And Dale Gartner, oh man, I'm so bad with names. Dionisoio, Zumera, whatever, and Manjushis Bat coined the term application security posture management in their 2023 Gartner Innovation Insight for Application Security Posture Management report. I guess that's somewhat recursive because the name of the report was the acronym. And they said it's the same definition basically. So my take on this, it kind of feels like what you're already doing in AppSec, to be totally honest with you. I think the use of the term signal is kind of interesting. I probably would have used feedback loop just from my DevOps kind of background, but okay, signal is fine. This kind of feels like we had to improve shift left, so we added one to it, so we have shift left plus plus. I do agree that understanding what you have, the inventory is crucial, specifically when you're allocating scarce resources. But to be blunt, none of this feels really new to me, and it kind of feels like they read the Phoenix Project, which if you're not familiar, double down on recommending that one. That is super useful. Please read that. Fictional account, but talks about DevOps. I also looked at what Claude says. ASPM is a comprehensive approach to managing and improving security posture of an organization's entire application portfolio. It provides a holistic view of application security risks across the software development lifecycle from development to production. And that bolding and underlining is me, because it was kind of interesting when I read this from Claude. I kind of flashed back to a keynote that I did actually at LastCon in 2011, and I actually found this slide. I'm surprised I still had it, right? Where here's a holistic view, right? There's more than just security vulnerabilities. You have all these other things that you have to do that's part of a true program of AppSec. So once again, I don't think any of this stuff is particularly new. I think you're probably already doing it. I asked Claude, what are the key points, the key features of ASPM? Visibility, okay. Risk assessment makes sense. Prioritization also makes sense. Integration, integrating with security tools and unified platform for managing AppSec, that also makes sense. Automation, it's been a goal as long as I've been doing stuff with computers, because I don't like doing rote work. Compliance, also been around since there were regulations. DevSecOps enablement, okay. Shift left, that's good. And metrics and reporting, also something that's been around kind of forever. And for those people who know me and those people who don't know me, um, I'm a bit of a Shakespeare buff. Here's a great quote from Julius Caesar, one of Shakespeare's plays. I've not come to praise Caesar, but to bury him. This is when Marcus Junius Brutus gave a speech in the Forum, if I remember correctly, after Julius Caesar got stabbed many times. I would like to change that slightly for the purposes of this talk. So I've not come to praise ASPM, but to bury it. And that's strictly from me. That's not from Shakespeare or from Brutus. So I got curious, and part of me preparing this talk was, let me see what it looks like if I try to understand how the marketplace, like what does it look like when I do a review of what's going on with ASPM. And I searched, right? What's the first thing you do? Do a Google search. Do a Google search for ASPM. And by the way, there's another acronym that apparently has more Google cachet than ASPM, Application Security Posture Management. So I had to add that in to get the correct results. I found 4 sponsored links from vendors, security vendors. The Gartner link, which was a definition I used earlier. 4 more security vendor sites. The Cloud Security Alliance had a blog, but the blog was written by a vendor, a security vendor. 2 more vendor sites, and then 3 sponsored links from security vendors. So that led me to ask myself, what was this ASPM again? Like, what was it? I think I figured out what it is. It's SEO juice, to be honest with you. And this, by the way, more AI fun. I asked AI to give me an image for SEO juice, and it produced the fairly logical, put your juice glass on your laptop's keyboard and vigorously pour juice into it, because what could go wrong? I also tried to look for people sort of talking contrary to ASPM. What's the negative view out in the world? I found a bunch of articles like this. No, not throwing shade at traceable AI in this case. But most of the articles that had a negative cast to them about ASPM said, yeah, it's good, but don't forget the thing that our tool does. In this case, traceable AI does API security. So they're like, yeah, ASPM is good, but don't forget API security, or don't forget container security, or don't forget cloud security. So honestly, to me, the more I looked into this, the more this feels like a ASPMification gold rush, right? Everybody wants to tie into that because it seems to be the hot term of the day. And the thing that honestly really troubled me is when I started doing this research, because I honestly thought I was going to go to a different place before I actually created this talk, was I'm wondering how many people are thinking hard about the direction of their AppSec programs and feeling like they're missing something, right? It's never bad to sort of reevaluate what your program's doing, how effective it is, can you optimize it, etc. But I really didn't like the idea that people would sort of start to question the value and what they've been doing just because there's a new acronym. And honestly, I don't see anything different in ASPM than what I've been saying, and lots of other people in this space have been saying for years. So I really don't want people to lose momentum just because they get wrapped around the axle about this new ASPM thing, which doesn't feel all that new. And I also had a flashback to when I was a kid, and I read a particular book that I quite liked from Dr. Seuss, right? So don't have FOMO, right? Don't worry, be happy. You don't have to worry about ASPM. You're probably already doing it. So what's the real value of ASPM? Like, let's dig into this a little bit further than my sort of initial research into understanding what like the world, or at least our industry, is saying about it. So if I return back to those key points of Claude, visibility, having visibility in anything has honestly been good, particularly in security programs, because you're usually third party and pushing a rope a bit to try to influence other people at a distance. So visibility is great. Also, you have scarce resources, so understanding how best to allocate them also comes with visibility. Risk assessment, right? Since there were dinosaurs and people were getting eaten by creatures, risk assessment has been a thing. So I don't think this is anything new. Prioritization, there's resource constraints everywhere. This is just the nature of being alive, to be honest with you, particularly in AppSec, where the ratio is usually 1 to 100 in terms of AppSec people to developers. So yeah, prioritization is huge, always has been. Integration, okay, they talked about CI/CD in this one. That's kind of new, so maybe we'll give them credit for that being a newish thing. Automation, that's been my goal since, shoot, I was a sysadmin running Linux boxes in the 90s, so I don't know that that's anything new. Compliance, ever since we had regulation, this was a thing. Shoot, US federal government, if nothing else. DevSecOps enablement, right, is the shift left movement. That's fairly new, but also not net new. And metrics and reporting have always been necessary. So once again, I kind of was struggling to figure out why is this a thing? So what was the real value of ASPM? You know, again, I'm thinking about this, and of course, assuming you're not in marketing, right, and you want the SEO juice, what can you do with this? Well, to be bluntly honest with you, budget. Budget is the thing you can do with this, right? Leverage the FOMO with your boss to say, hey, ASPM, it's a thing. We need to do this. We don't have sufficient ASPM, whatever that means, and get some budget out of it. Honestly, to be blunt and direct, if I was running an AppSec program today, I would use ASPM to try to, as leverage to try to get budget. Because I think that's probably the best you can do with it, because in terms of practices, there are things you already should be doing, right? Or want to do or aspire to do, depending on where you are in your maturity of your program, but they're nothing that's net new. So highly recommend, if you can get budget out of this, please do. Why not? So deja vu all over again. So in doing this research, I had a little bit of a flashback back to a Velocity conference that I went to in 2015. It was in New York City. It was with a good friend of mine, Aaron Weaver, who was a co-leader of the AppSec pipeline program. And this is the first time that I could find where we publicly talked about an AppSec pipeline. And this is the diagram. The whole idea is you have intake, which comes into your life as an AppSec person or DevOps person, whatever you're doing. You have to understand what to do with that work. That's the triage stage of like, okay, I've got this work now that I need to handle. How much care and feeding or love can I give this work? I'm going to do some testing based on the risk and the value to the business of whatever this thing is that I'm assessing. I'm going to push all that to a vulnerability repository like Defect Dojo. I can do false positives. I can push it to downstream stakeholders, which is the deliver portion of an AppSec pipeline. I love showing this diagram. I've been showing it for years, obviously, since 2015. I think this really encapsulates generally what happens in every AppSec program. And I've used this ever since Aaron and I came up with this, I think originally back in 2014. But one thing I like to do when I do these talks is realize that this is not like, this didn't happen in 15 minutes with a nice diagramming program. This started out with me grabbing a piece of paper and scribbling junk on my desk, right? Including the inevitable and obligatory coffee stains, right? This is the very first AppSec pipeline that I ever drew. It changed, but this helped me think through the situation of how it had to work and what the stages were. And this reflected work I'd already been doing for a while. I just sort of formalized it in that pretty diagram. And then the visibility term that I mentioned earlier, I pulled this out of a talk I did in 2018 in, I think it was in London, if I remember correctly, where I was postulating to my audience, hey, if you have an AppSec pipeline, you can increase visibility because you need to get that visibility up the food or the org chart rather, excuse me, so that executives have something that they can see, right? Because if you look at this iceberg of ignorance, the number of problems staff see is 100%, then 74% for team leaders, managers 9%, and you really have a very little sliver of opportunity to have the executives see what you need them to see. So the more visibility you have, the better. And as I was thinking through this and doing this diagram, I thought, okay, is there another definition of ASPM? Maybe there is. And maybe what ASPM is really an AppSec pipeline makeover. Perhaps, I don't know, but it kind of feels like that to me. So if ASPM is really just the AppSec you've already been doing, what are the first principles of AppSec that I think are crucial for any program? And this is based on me doing programs at small startups, at very large companies. I guess my company size ranges from 5 to, what was that one? 300,000? Some ridiculously large number. So these apply regardless of the size of your business. So coverage over depth. And what I mean by this is if I was able to only do one activity or I was starting a brand new AppSec program, I would focus on getting coverage of testing versus depth. Why I say that is because coverage allows you to understand the state of all of your inventory, or at least the inventory that you understand at the time that you start, because you probably will find new things. But if you have a what I like to call a smell test across all of the things that are within your scope, that's when you can make very interesting prioritizations, right? You can understand that this team really has it going on. They have their stuff all settled. I really don't need to mess with them. I just need to leave them alone and make sure they don't drift. But this other team, oh my goodness, they're a basket case, and I do need to spend some time with them because they're way off the reservation, right? So these are the kind of things you can do with coverage, that if you just pick an app and go deep, you can find lots of very interesting things, definitely. And I would not say depth should be avoided, but it's not the first thing I would do. You can't measure a trend until you start collecting data, right? You've got to have data there. This is where you need some kind of single source of truth. I would use Defect Dojo. That's what I've used for years. But you need some way to measure that, because you need to demonstrate, if nothing else, to your business, whoever's hiring you, that you are doing the work that you were hired to do, aka find and assess the state of security of those things that are within your scope, right? Whatever your scope is, it depends based on where you're working. I've had lots of different scopes under the title of AppSec. But measuring is super important. Inventory, honestly, is everything. I can't tell you how many places I've worked where there was no inventory, and the fact that I just started keeping track of the things I tested, I became the de facto inventory. It is surprising, of all the places I've worked, I've only ever worked at one that had what I would call a solid inventory of their custom created applications. I was amazed. And it's the only one I've ever heard of, talking in this industry to a whole bunch of peers for years. So this is an unfortunately not particularly sexy aspect of the business, but a crucial one. Because once again, how do you prioritize if you don't know what you have, right? You can't. You have to make guesses. You still kind of have to make guesses about risk and prioritization, but the more information you can get, the better those guesses are. They go from being a wild guess to at least a mildly educated guess, which is hugely valuable. You need a single source of truth. This for me has always been Defect Dojo since it started out as a whiteboard. That's the problem we were trying to solve back in the day. Cannot recommend this enough to have a single place. In fact, Defect Dojo came out of Rackspace when I ran the product security team there. And my mantra to the people who worked in the product security team was, you did not do work unless it showed up in Defect Dojo. I don't care what you found on what product. If it wasn't in Dojo, you didn't do the work, because I needed to collect and have that inventory, have those metrics and numbers that I could use to tell the business, hey, this is the state of affairs of things wherever I'm working, and here's our 10 great people and our 10 not so great products or projects or whatever you call your groups that you're interacting with, and Defect Dojo can do all that for you, that and more. Owners will be crucial. Finding out who owns what is really crucial to making remediation happen. So if you're not capturing that today, make sure you start capturing it, well, later today and going forward. But that is going to be vital for you to figure out who you need to go and talk to make things happen. Funny story here. Years ago, I worked at a government agency. We had a particular problem in an SSO application, but the fix actually had to be done on the applications behind that SSO system. And so I made a big spreadsheet, did a risk review, found all the, categorized and prioritized how to get them fixed. And of course, you end up with this long tail of sort of interesting applications. And in this case, those applications had no owners that we could find. What I ended up doing, honestly, was getting my favorite book, sitting in the office of the head of PM until they walked back into their office. Said, hello, I just wanted to let you know on Friday I need to report, this was midweek, on Friday I need to report to the CIO the state of getting all of these remediations done of these particular applications for this SSO issue. I cannot find owners for these 10, 15, or whatever it was, applications. You're the head of PM, therefore I'm going to assume they're yours unless you tell me otherwise. And then suddenly I found out that, oh no, these belong to Jim and Sally and Bob and John. And basically the head of PM just allocated those on the fly, and I got to go around and tell people, hey, by the way, you now own this app, and there's a problem with it. Right, but getting those ownership is really crucial to getting things fixed. So that will be a problem you will have. The other thing I can't stress enough is having empathy, shadowing, and swapping roles. And what I mean by that is understanding what it takes to get things fixed and understanding what it's like to be a dev, right? Most devs in their annual review don't have fix stuff that security yells at them about, right? That's not one of their goals. So if you can have empathy, and like a perfect example of making this work for you is SLAs, right? Most people in security know what a service level agreement is, right? I have an SLA, I find it critical, you need to fix it within 2 days or whatever your timeline is, right? That's great. However, what I started doing with SLAs is I don't need it fixed in 2 days or 24 hours or whatever your timeline is. I need a remediation plan in place because this allows for cases where there's just no way. And I learned this at Rackspace. We had an issue that went across a big part of our compute cloud. And we're talking tens of thousands of servers making up the compute cloud at Rackspace. And that required migrating running VMs to a new host, patching and restarting that host, and then migrating those VMs back. So this is not going to happen in 24 hours, which was what our critical was at the time. However, I could get a plan out of that team with dates that I could put into a calendar and check up with them and make sure they're making progress. And that really changed the way that conversation happened. Suddenly, I'm giving them empathy. I'm saying, I don't fully understand what it takes to fix this thing. You do, you're the product owner. But I need, from my perspective, at least an understanding of what you believe you can do in terms of getting this fixed. And that changed the narrative. Because if I'd gone into that meeting and said, you have to patch 10,000 plus servers in 24 hours, they would have giggled at me and thrown me out of the room. Well, probably said something more blunt than giggling at me, but you get the idea. So the other thing I want to talk about is what I call the generations of pipelines. As I came up with this concept with Aaron and I started implementing this at a bunch of different places, there's sort of generations of pipelines that you can put in place or that have evolved over time as my programs matured. I want to talk through that with you. So what I would consider the first gen pipeline, and this is straight out of, or this is very much inspired by, honestly, the DevOps principles that are in the Phoenix project. Look at your team's purpose, and those processes with Agent is straight out of there. This is where you need to get your house in order. Before you start reaching out to other teams and asking them to do things on your behalf, you really need to have your house in order, right? If the AppSec team is dysfunctional, taking that team and asking other teams to work with you isn't a great way to start. So I like starting with things that are wholly owned or almost entirely owned by the AppSec team so you control your destiny and you can show success early and often, which is a great thing. So this is what I would call my first generation pipeline. A second generation pipeline, I've got my house in order, so I'm going to look outside of me. Now I'm going to reach out to those teams that I have a good relationship with. I'm friendly with them. I know they're doing CI/CD. I'm like, hey, can I add a tool to your CI/CD run? It's always going to go green. It's just going to ship some results off to Defect Dojo so I can understand, what your particular app looks like from a security standpoint, a gentle introduction to asking them to do things on our behalf, where we're actually providing value to them. And we're not blocking them. We're not the party of NO, we're the party of KNOW, right? That's what I would call a second gen pipeline. And then a third gen pipeline is when you take that same process, but now instead of having things that are generally calendar based or release based or on a normal kind of cadence once a week, once a month, once a quarter, whatever your cadence is, you can sort of turn that up a notch and have what I would call event-based security, right? When something happens, I've done a PR, I've done a merge to main, whatever that is, I can do an assessment of that particular point in time. And that really reduces the scope of the testing to a very narrow piece of code, which is useful just from getting things done and making it quick and efficient. But it also is crazy speed. I did this at Duo Security. We were testing 46 repos for secrets and SAST, and I was doing 46 repos in 3 minutes and 36 seconds or something like that. It was silly fast. It was fast enough that when we set this up, we weren't sure how it was going to work. But by the time we ran the first test, we realized we thought we were going to do these maybe weekly or maybe daily if we were lucky. We actually started doing these on every commit. Every single code commit, it got run through a gauntlet, air quotes, of tests, and then instant feedback. Well, we would push results to Defect Dojo. Defect Dojo would push them into the company, that particular team's Slack instance, and then bam, like the minute they did a commit, they got results in Slack that said, hey, John just did a commit. And by the way, we found 2 mediums in this commit. You might want to look at these, right? Those kind of things you can do if you're event-based, which is pretty amazing. Just some final notes on automation. Usually takes, well, when you think about running pipelines, there's usually sort of 3 major phases. There's a pre-run, right, which sets up what you need. So in the example from Duo, I had some sort of pre-run setup stages that would check out code, run clock against them to figure out. Clock is a source code analysis tool, tells you how many lines of what type of code are in that particular repo. I would use that to determine, okay, this is a Python repo, I need to run these tools. Oh, this is a Java repo, I need to run these tools, right? That was all in the setup. The pipeline run itself was running the specific tools based on whatever I needed or discovered honestly in setup. And then after the pipeline ran, I'd have some post activities, like after activities. Send all those results to Defect Dojo, my single source of truth. Clean up any results if I have some sort of dangling resources that I don't want to get billed for. In the case of Duo, this was all in the cloud, so anything I could nuke saved us money. And then feedback loops. This is that message into Slack, right? Is there a way I can add a comment to a PR? I can put a chat message in an appropriate channel for that team to let them know the results of looking at what they just did. And then one thing to just be warned about, I've had this happen a couple times to me in my career when I started really making a pipeline run fast and get tons of results. I actually got some haters. I got disinvited to lunches. I had some teams push back at me and ask me to go slower, to which I said, no, I'm going to go the speed I go because that's just how I work. But know that this can be radically successful. So let's talk about making ASPM real and actionable as a final part of this. So I like to think of the 4 whats. So intake, what work do you own or comes into scope is your problem, right? What is inbound? That's intake, right? This can be, I don't know, we have a policy that says we do a PCI scan every quarter. Fine, it's the end of a quarter, I do a PCI scan. These could be event-based. I've had situations where we had a very waterfall team and I would run weekly scans that were unofficial until, I think it was 2 weeks out if I remember, or maybe it was a month out from when the actual release was. And then those were official. So I gave them 2 months of warnings about the state of their code before we got a month out of the release and things got official. But now they actually had to handle the findings that they've had 2 months of warnings about. Triage. So I've got this work that's landed in my plate. I need to understand how many of my scarce resources I can allocate towards it. Generally speaking, what I've done is make three sort of buckets, for lack of a better term, of a high, medium, low. And depending on what I've automated and what I have in place, if you're a high, you get everything I have pointed at you because that's just what I've got. If you're a medium, maybe you get some automation and a little bit of human triage of your results. If you're a low, I'm going to automate the scan and do the thing, I say is bad. I'm just going to ship you the results and hope for the best because I honestly don't have the bandwidth or team power to do more than that. But I want to at least give you some kind of understanding of the security state of your thing, even if you are a less important part of the overall structure of this company. Test. This is where you run a bunch of tools and or do manual testing to understand the state of that target. This could also be things like threat models or whatever, but that's what the test area is. Hopefully this is highly automated. This is where containers are your friends, by the way. Containers are great. And then deliver, right? What addresses the needs of downstream stakeholders, right? So for management, you need to tell them the state of affairs, how many tests you've run, what's our rate to remediate findings, are we trending up or trending down on producing new findings, all of that stuff, right? For developers, we need to give them actionable findings to go fix. I used to say at Rackspace, if you wanted to find my foot in your backside, the quickest way to do that was to give a team a non-actionable finding, because suddenly now we've wasted their time, they waste our time arguing with us about why this isn't actionable and nobody wins. So I really err on the side of caution about pushing only truly actionable things down to the dev teams because they're busy enough as it is. But that's the deliver portion. And then 2 fundamental truths. You have to understand where you are today, particularly if you're just starting out or you just got hired into a product security, AppSec, DevSecOps, whatever you want to call it, role. You need to understand the reality of what you've inherited and or are building, which could be nothing or could be an existing program. It could be, I've walked into places where I was hated because the past person who ran that program didn't win friends and positively influence anybody at that business. So I had to go spend a good half a year proving that I wasn't the last person and I could play nice with others. So you need to understand that. That's fundamental. And you need a single source of truth. You need a canonical representation of the state of affairs of the things that are in scope for your AppSec program. That is so crucial. I can't stress that enough. And then finally, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. This is a, boxer who I'm forgetting the name of, Mike Tyson quote, right? Hopefully life will come and smack you in the face. Your plans may go awry, but keep working because you will eventually get to where you need to go. There's a lot of iteration running programs. Trust me, I've been there many times. Okay, so the key takeaways. Well, I think ASPM equals AppSec, and I'd probably be snarky and add pipeline to the end of it because I coined that term. But honestly, if you're doing good, solid AppSec today, ASPM hasn't changed your world. It might be a way, like I said, to get budget, but I don't think it's anything revolutionary or you need to rethink everything that you've done or currently doing in your program. And one way to survive that hype train is don't ride the ride, don't get on, right? Use it to your advantage, do the Bruce Lee thing, right? Pick the things that you can get use out of and make yourself better with. So if you can use ASPM, like I said, to get budget, I would totally be down with that. I think that's a great plan. And then there are sort of crucial to any AppSec program is inventory, having that single source of truth, and particularly if you're just starting, coverage over depth. Understanding the broad view of things lets you make so much more informed choices. I'm gonna die on the coverage over depth hill. At least you still have to get to depth for some of them, but not all of them need depth, particularly if they're less risky, less important to the business apps. And your resource constrained, those may never get the depth that you would give those crucial apps to your company. And like I mentioned earlier, you're going to iterate and iterate and iterate. Like my cool AppSec pipeline that took me to almost 10xing, or the 46 repos in 3 minutes that I talked about earlier, that didn't happen overnight. I had a completely failed experiment where I was trying to use Jenkins, and at the time, Jenkins running containers was a mess. And my planned thing just completely blew up in my face. I spent about a month on it, had to go to my boss and say, look, I've blown a month. I can't get anywhere. I'm going to start over. Like, that's just the state of affairs. It didn't feel like a great conversation, but it actually helped me get to the final solution that I ended up coming up with that got us those 46 repos in 36 minutes. So you will iterate, you will be tripped up and you will fail, but if you keep pushing, you can get there. Automate the things that don't take a human brain, because honestly, if you can take those drudgery tasks off the plate of yourself or your teammates, suddenly work isn't so bad, right? All of those like stupid, annoying tasks, if you can automate those and just have to deal with the more interesting aspects of this business, you will see a huge increase in productivity. I think mostly because you're just not beat down by the drudgery. And people are always going to be the most critical resource. If you're just a one-man team or a one-person team or a group of 12, 15, whatever, doesn't matter. You will never have enough people, and it's the people that get things done. Tech is cool, and I love tech, but it's really the people that make things happen. If you look on the lastcon.org site for last year's talk, I did this last section that I talked about the sort of the principles of AppSec. I have an expanded version of that. It's up on YouTube. You can go find it. I would highly recommend it. I'm going to pause a little bit for you to grab your screenshotting thing if you want to screenshot this for the URL because it's rather long and ugly. Or you can find it by going to lastcon.org and looking at last year's event. Or you can find it on YouTube if you search for it as well. And remember, from one of my favorite movies, Brazil, that's Robert De Niro saying, listen, kid, we're all in this together. And we are. Like, AppSec is it feels like a big thing, but it's a pretty small group of people doing some pretty cool work. So enjoy it and be nice to everybody because you're going to find them again in your career. It's amazing how small AppSec can be at times. And then finally, keep calm and AppSec on. And that's it. That's the end of my presentation.
All right, thank you, Matt. Does anyone have any questions? You can put them in the chat.
Yeah, this is a bit of a fire hose, so I apologize.
All right, well, I do have one. So if we're saying that ASPM is basically your AppSec pipeline, how do we think of talking about a lot of the things that we're talking about still as vulnerability management or universal unified vulnerability management?
Yeah, I think the fundamental thing I got out of preparing this talk, and to be honest, I thought this was going to go in a different way. When I proposed this talk to LastCon a while ago, they asked me to be a speaker there, and I had this idea. I thought I was going to find something much more, that it was way more depth to this thing, honestly. That there was going to be some unique aspect that I could really pull out and say, hey, of all the 10 things of ASPM, here's the one really cool thing that feels new. But the more I dug into it, the more it was the same. And so I think for me, whatever you want to, like, I wouldn't get tripped up on the labels, I guess, is really where I'm driving with this. There are some fundamental truths about doing security programs, in particularly AppSec or product security or DevSecOps, whatever you want to call it, vulnerability management, doesn't matter the name. But there's fundamental things you have to do. And whatever label is popular today doesn't change those fundamental truths. If I throw up a rock, it's going to fall because there's this thing called gravity. And it doesn't matter if I call gravity something else. If I throw up a rock, it's still going to fall. So, like, I think the biggest thing I got out of this is just don't get tripped up about these new acronyms and feel like there's something missing. Evaluate them, compare it against what you're currently doing. But if you're doing, air quote, the right thing, there's probably nothing you need to change.
Okay. Thank you. We do have another question. Is the ability of run security tools /scan a feature to be added to Defect Dojo anytime soon? So
Oh,
that's a
interesting.
Dojo question.
That's a Dojo specific question. Yeah. So yes and no. So Defect Dojo is always, or has tried, well, has purposefully chosen to not be a security tool, rather an aggregation of the outputs of other tools. Now we have some things for Pro that I think are pretty cool and approach that. And what they are is what we call connectors. So if you're a Pro customer, you can get what's called a connector. I think we're up to 8 or 9 different things we connect with, like Sneak, dependency track, check marks, etc. A bunch of different tools, SemGrep. The idea of a connector is you have an agreement or whatever, a contract, a subscription to a security vendor's tool, and they have an API. And any security tool worth a darn that has an API generally has a way to schedule and run those that's built into the tool. So there's no sort of reason to compete in that regard. What you really want is an automatic way to get those results into Defect Dojo. And so connectors allow you to give us the URL and whatever you need to authenticate to that API bearer token, whatever. And then Defect Dojo will automatically go out, pull in those results, put them into the right place in your Defect Dojo instance, and then you don't have to set it up anymore. So like in the case of Sneak, I integrate Sneak with my GitHub, GitLab, whatever. It knows my repos, it's pulling in results. Like you can do all of that within the vendor's tool. However, I want to get those results into Dojo so I can combine them with all the other work I'm doing. That's where connectors come into play. They allow you to point Defect Dojo Pro, at this case, at Sneak, in my example, suck in all those Sneak results, drop them into the right products in Defect Dojo, and then you're done. So I don't know that we're going to be a tool runner, so to speak, but we really try to make it as easy as possible for Dojo and for our Pro customers to get results in, because the more you can get in, the better your visibility is at a broad scope. I did the same thing at a past company where I found out there was a team that had Qualys WAS, their web application security tool. For whatever reason, this other group had this tool. They were running it. I didn't have purview over it, but I knew they had it. So I asked them, I'm like, hey, can I get an API key? Can I pull in those results and drop them into Dojo? And they said, sure. I wrote some code to do that, push those results into Dojo, and now I have a better understanding. Right? It's not even a tool that I ran, I configured, I had anything to do with, but suddenly my program got that much more visibility because I could pull in that data. So Dojo is really trying to make it as easy as possible for customers to get data in any number of ways. I hope that helps and answers your question.
All right, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Okay, well, then thank you all for joining today, and we will see you at the next event. We have a really exciting lineup for November, so stay tuned in the newsletter and you're on LinkedIn with a special guest for our November webinar. It's going to be really great. Thank you again, and thank you, Matt.
Absolutely. This was fun. Thank you, everybody.